Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this second Zoom chant class. Tonight we will be concentrating on the hymn of Compline, which is Te lucis ante terminum. My name is Matthew Schellhorn. I'm the Director of Music for London of the Latin Mass Society, and the intention of these classes is to open up some learning opportunities to people who are isolated at home or not in our country, and this is part and parcel of the outreach of the society, which is, after all, a charity. And last year we founded a new schola in London under the patron name of St. John Horton, who was a London Carthusian, and some people have been benefiting from chant training regularly. Now it's at twice a month, or was before the lockdown, and so I thought it would be good to open up the learning at this difficult time in isolation. This effort represents the first time that the Latin Mass Society has provided chant training online, so we should pray to our patron saint that we avoid technical glitches. Now, in this class, as I've said, we're going to cover several aspects to do with the hymn. I'm not going to assume any knowledge, except some basic musical reading skills. The class is being recorded and will go online, so it's a generalist approach. That said, I'm very happy to clarify anything as we go along. Just to talk about those practicalities, you can see I've muted everyone just to avoid any background noises and distractions, but there's the opportunity to ask questions as we go along. The way to do that, first and foremost, is to go up to the top and go to View, and then show the chat. That chat box can be moved around, dragged and resized. So do make the most of that opportunity, and you can communicate with the whole group. As I can see, some of you are saying good evening and hello, which is very nice. And I'd encourage you to use that chat box if anything is unclear. I'll try to address questions as we go. If you'd like to go ahead and anybody else test the chat, just drop us a line and your name and your location, which might be quite interesting. Now, I can see that there are a few people here who weren't at the class yesterday, but without, and there are others who were there. So without repeating myself, just a quick summary of what we went through yesterday, really, with regard to Compline in general, before we look at the matter of tonight. We are, of course, talking about Compline in the traditional rite. That represents the last hour of the day. It's from the Breviary of 1960. The text of that can be found in several places, but I would steer you towards the point I made yesterday at the bottom of this list, which is a website called divinumofficium.com. And that is a very, very good website to find the text of the office and indeed of the Mass of the day, of any day of the year, of the liturgical year, actually according to several different calendars as well, which is quite handy. And there's the website which is set up for today, Sunday Pentecost, or Whit Sunday, and you can see I've got their Compline selected at the bottom. That's the place to go, and then click through and you get the text of the office with a translation in very nice English as well. So that's a very, very good resource, which I drew everyone's attention to yesterday. And having seen that website, you will notice the way Compline is structured. Now, yesterday I talked a bit more about this in detail, but to whiz through our, I should say zoom through our Compline roadmap, it's sometimes helpful to have a kind of architectural view of what's going on. I think as a chant trainer, I often say to the singers to think ahead. It's not only good musical practice, it's very good when you're singing to think ahead. It's also good in terms of what's coming next that you're going to need to sing. So not just thinking ahead as you sing, but also in the bits in between the singing, always think about what's coming. And in order to do that, I think some kind of visual image is very helpful. So Compline begins with the introduction, we go straight to the Psalms, then comes the hymn, then comes the chapter or reading, then there is a response, which varies, the canticle, the Nunc Dimittis, the prayer, and the blessing at the end, and then the destination, which is of the day, if you like, is the Marian antiphon, which at the moment is the Regina Coeli. So I've whizzed through zoomed through the roadmap there, but the slides will be available if anybody would like to look at that. And this is where we are tonight, as it were. We've sung the introduction, we've sung the psalmody, which aspects of which I covered yesterday, and now we are addressing the hymn Te Lucis, which is kind of at the midway point. It's number 3 on the journey, but in terms of time, it's basically at the middle, because what follows kind of goes by quite quickly. Of course, Compline itself is not particularly long, maybe half an hour. So I'd say this is about the halfway point. And as I mentioned yesterday, sources for the music. Tonight, when we sing Compline later, I shall put it up on screen. But if you need to get your hands on that, the source, the ultimate source, is the antiphonal, the Roman antiphonal. But again, there's a wonderful online resource built by someone who's become a friend, Ben Bloomfield, and that's his web address at the bottom. Or if you just Google chant Compline, it comes up. And there it is, all nicely set out. And again, I've selected today, 31st of May, and it tells me that is Pentecost, tells me the class of the feast, and I can decide what I'm singing, and I can also decide whether I'm singing that on my own or whether I have the benefit of a priest or deacon present, which alters things slightly. But there we are, that's where the music comes from, where you can find it. So now let's talk a little bit about the Te Lucis itself, blow by blow. It's a hymn. It's worth stressing that it's a hymn because every hour of the office has a hymn, one hymn. And all of these hymns are different, and they vary, and in my opinion they are something of the richest musical repertoire in the antiphonal to be sung. It's a uniquely Christian concept, that the word hymnos was associated straight away with Christian singing. I'll come back to that in a little bit. There are the occurrences in Scripture of these Greek words. And it's been posited that the word hymn and the word psalm were used interchangeably, but they were more prevalent in different communities. So Psalmos was used by the Jews, who of course had their tradition of singing already, and hymns developed in the Gentile community. And they of course have differences. St. Augustine has stated that the difference, one of the main differences, is that hymns are limited by the rhythm of the text, and that affects the musical melodies. And again, I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. There are other hymns in the liturgy, like the Gloria in Excelsis Deo, but they are, of course, free-flowing. They're not limited as such, and they're not strophic, or if they are, they're not structured in the same way, strophe by strophe. And there are lots of different kinds of hymns. I guess I'm dwelling on this because to most people, hymns represent secular music sung verse by verse, often with organ accompaniment, that kind of thing, well-known hymns. But in fact, when we talk of hymns in the liturgy, we're discussing particular constructions, musical and prose constructions, of which a lot of modern hymns are actually paraphrases. So that's the main difference. So having gone to our Compline website, and we've set it up for Compline on Pentecost Sunday, and in fact it will automatically select the one that's showing there boxed in grey at the bottom. There are several proper melodies for this hymn, by which I mean several melodies which change and belong to particular celebrations. And it would be automatically selected if you go, but that's the complete list there. And as you can see, some are quite specific. So towards the bottom, you've got one melody of the Te Lucis sung on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, and above that, one melody sung on the Feast of Christ the King. The one that we'll be singing tonight is sung from yesterday and all the way through most of this week, but that's it. And then as you get a bit further up, let's say Lent, that has a much greater occurrence in the Divine Office. And then you have all Sundays, most Sundays and minor feasts, and then you have all of the ferias, or the non-feast days, and consequently the ones towards the top are the ones that you will hear most often, and the ones towards the bottom, by and large, are the ones which are the rarest. So I thought what I would do tonight, given that this is a general class, as I've said, is first of all I'll talk a little bit about the Ferial melody of the Te Lucis, which is common, and lots of communities will just sing that one, in actual fact, even on the other days. But also the Sunday melody, and I'll say a little bit about that one too, and then we'll talk about the one for tonight, all of which are different, all of which have different characteristics and different musical challenges, all of which are beautiful, and I think all of which present some good opportunities for learning. Here's the Ferial one. This is the one that's sung on weekdays when there's no other feast, in that particular bracket up at the top, which, as you can see, covers a lot of time in the year. So it's very, very common. And I think if I were to talk about the kinds of things that one should look for when encountering a hymn for the first time, or refreshing one's memory, I think it's possibly most helpful to think of hymns and hymn melodies in terms of contour, so in terms of shape, and melodic shape. appreciate if you don't read the chant, or if you don't sing often, the nitty gritty of the notation is where the I is drawn. But I would say step back from it and have a good look at it, bearing in mind that each verse is going to be the same in terms of melody. So we're looking at the shape of one verse as being representative, if you like, of the entire piece. So let's look at that first verse there. Te lucis ante terminum, rerum creato poscimo sut, pro tua clementia sis preso et custodia. So that section there. And what we notice is it starts quite high. In fact, the highest note of the hymn is within that first phrase. And then it comes down a little bit, just gently going up and down and gently going up and down. So by the middle, where the bar is what we call a half bar here, we have started high and we've come down a little bit lower. And then we can see in the third phrase, we're at our lowest point, pro tua clementia. So cle is the lowest point there. And then there's a rise again, not quite as high as the first phrase. So it's a very visual thing. It looks a bit overwhelming. Also, you'll notice in the musical books and on the page here that the hymn occupies often a large part of the books, and sometimes it spreads over 2 or even 3 pages of a liber usualis, for instance, which I talked about yesterday. But in actual fact, the hymn is, by definition, a very succinct melody, but which is repeated. So what matters most of all is getting the impression correct from the beginning, and that can often be the best prompt to remember. So I've tried to give a kind of expression of that in terms of shape. As you can see, it comes gently down and then rises back up with a little dip at the end. And at the bottom there, I'd say that is, to me, I think, oh yes, it's that one. It's the one that goes gently down to the bottom and comes all the way back up again and slightly settles at the end. So that's a little bit about the shape. And then, of course, we've got slightly more difficult aspects of it, if you like. So here I've circled in verse 2, just for clarity, because it's the same, but just so you can see it clearly. That would be possibly the first thing that my eye is drawn to as I'm learning this hymn. Most of the time, as you can see from the green line at the beginning, certainly for most of the movement, we're moving by step. So moving by step is, as a chant trainer and as a singer, singing by step is something lots of people don't struggle with too much. It's quite normal to be able to sing just moving by step is natural. But when we get into jumps and leaps, or what we call thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, the wider intervals, there can be great disparity. So it's quite important to nail psychologically where those leaps are and what kind of leaps. And the reason I've circled those 3 moments is because each of those leaps is actually the same as each other. If we've got some chant readers here, I wonder if somebody would kindly enlighten the group what note names those 2 notes are. And don't hold back to let other people have a go. And indeed, do we have anyone who can't name the notes? That would also be helpful. Oh, yes. That's the name of the interval. Andrea says minor third. Excellent. And do we have the names of those notes? A, to C. Absolutely. So that is our third, that's our small third, A to C, which comprises 3 semitones on a keyboard. So we can see that's our smallest third, smaller third, sorry, the minor third. And so I'm clocking here, if you like, that the melody comprises steps and it also comprises minor thirds. It also comprises a different interval here. This is also a third. If someone would like to name the notes and posit what kind of third this is. Relying on Andrea here, I think, has got the musical intervals. G to B, well done. That's a G to a B, slightly different from an A to a C. Can anybody suggest why? So a G to a B, if you can imagine that on a piano keyboard, which is the best way, I think, the easiest way nowadays of working out intervals. G to a B has between it 2 black notes. That means overall it comprises 4 semitones, not 3. That means it's a major third, a large third, as opposed to a minor third, which is a small third. It's a third by definition because the interval between the names of the notes is it's 3 letters, A, B, C in the case of the minor third, and G, A, B. So it can only be a third. It's called a third, but the question is, as singers, what kind of third is it? Is it a small third or is it a large third? So I sometimes find that the best way of memorizing some of these intervals is to associate it with a melody that you know. So if in doubt, I think a minor third is quite useful. You can either think of it as a happy birthday plus a little bit more, so that would be that's happy birthday, and from the top note a little semitone, so that's your minor third. Or you can be a little bit snazzier and think about that if you find minor thirds scary, which some people do, to think of pum pa pum pum pa, that's at a pa dee da da dee da dee. That's how we get our minor third. We think of something that's going to shock us. Or we have our major third. It's possibly a little bit more easy to remember. I like to think of Beethoven 3, which are pa dee da da dee da dee da da dee, the beginning of Beethoven 3, da dee da. But there are all sorts of different ways of remembering these, but they are quite different. Da da is a minor third, da da is a major third. So it's important, I think, when approaching these, to be absolutely clear on what those intervals are. What I'm going to do now is sing through this melody, and then we'll move on to the next one. So I'll sing through just to give us something to focus on as we think about the intervals. Te lucis ante terminum rerum creator poscimus, ut pro tua clementia sis presul et custodia. Very beautiful melody. Before we move on, just a couple of points similar to what I said yesterday. The breath and the breaks in the hymnody, just as with the psalmody, come in the middle of the verses. So whereas with the psalms yesterday, they were denoted by an asterisk, here in the music we can see they are denoted by a half bar, what we call a half bar, which is that bar after poscimus. So that is the place where we take the breath. Otherwise, if we can, we sing all the way through. And the second thing to point out is, of course, those accents on the text, again, which I referred to yesterday. So those accents on the text are a good indication of where the speech rhythm heads for. So te lucis ante terminum, rerum creator poscimus. So we look for those little accents, and they give us an idea most of the time with hymns as to where to put the stress. But there are exceptions. There are always exceptions in the Roman Rite. Let's go on to the next one. Here we are. Sorry for the backwards and forwards. So these ordinary Sundays and minor feasts. And again, so if we're looking at our hymn, so I'm going to open this up this time. I think let's have some general impressions of this melody, perhaps in comparison with the previous one. That might be helpful. Description of the shape is what we're looking for, really. Shape is more up and down. It is more up and down, isn't it? It's more angular, clearly, straight away. I think also perhaps you could call that unpredictable. One goes up, goes down, goes up, and then goes up, and then even further down, and there's a lot more unpredictability, as Sarah has spotted there. Also, that means that that means we have to focus perhaps a little bit more clearly on the intervals, because we can't rely on those surprises being less regular. It means we're going to be kept on our toes as singers. And so I've circled, well, there's my shape. I think the shape is basically down to the lowest point in the middle, similar to the other one, but then rises back up. But overall, if we can simplify the shape, it looks like a V or an inverted arch or a seagull at the seaside. And that would be the shape that I associate with it, rather than getting drawn into the minutiae. Always step back first. And then we're looking at the nitty-gritty, and we can see I've circled the in red the intervals that I need to focus on. I can see straight away procul is a G and a B. That's our major third. Recedant is our A and our C, so that's our minor third. So immediately going to be hit with some false relation, conflicting interval pitching. So a little bit of care needed there. And then further along the line, I can see an even bigger interval. So let's see who can name. This is between que and nos. A new interval. Perfect fourth. Perfect fourth from Christopher. Yes, exactly. It's a perfect fourth. Or fourth. In actual fact, you would be hard pressed to find any other kind of fourth in chant. I won't say never, because I have found a couple of contradictions on that front, but it was generally avoided to augment or diminish the fourth to make a big one or a small one. And generally speaking, the interval is a G to a C, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 semitones, or an A to a D, which is the same, or B to an E, which is the same, or C to an F, which is the same, or D to a G. So the contradiction there will be an F to a B. That would be the only example of a non-perfect fifth, but perfect fourth. I apologise. So yes, it's our perfect fourth. And if I were going to associate an interval, a melody in my mind, I would be thinking, personally, there are lots and lots of options. I would be thinking of Here Comes the Bride. Here comes the bride, da-dum-ba-bum. That is our stock perfect fourth in mind. And of course, you can start that from any point, any note, and you can therefore in your mind pitch a perfect fourth. It's interesting, isn't it, that almost anecdotally we learn our intervals before we know what they're called, and then we have to learn what they are. So yes, that's our perfect fourth. And then a little bit further along, at Compline, I've circled in blue that moment there, and I just thought it was worth noticing at this point that is the first instance we've had between these two te lucises of non-syllabic treatment of the text. So there we have what we call a melisma. So we have several notes for one syllable, or should we say more than one note for the syllable in the melody of the hymn. And that, of course, will effectively slow the text down, won't it? Because we've got longer to spend on the melody than we had in the previous one. So whereas before we had a note, one musical note per syllable, now we have, in this case here, 3 notes on that syllable. So clearly there will be more notes, more musical notes in this setting of the Te Lucis, this hymn, than in the previous one. That's the kind of thing that my eyes would be drawn to. Let me sing this one through. Te lucis ante terminum rerum creator poscimus, ut pro tua clementia sis presul et custodia. That's a rather nice one too. I think in practice probably it's more soothing in performance than it is to kind of think about or to learn. But they're quite memorable. But I think it's worth. The reason I'm going into this level of detail is because what I'm saying now applies to lots and lots of things, not just this Te Lucis, but really any hymn in the repertoire. You can apply this kind of approach. Let's look at the final Te Lucis. And there it is, the one that's prescribed for Whit Sunday, all the days from the Vigil of Pentecost, which means Compline being sung yesterday evening, which of course was the beginning of Pentecost, and all the way through until this coming Friday, inclusive. Impressions of this. But stepping back, so let's just think about the shape that we might describe. More wavy. It sounds like a request at the hairdressers. More wavy. Being somewhat short of hair myself, it's not a request I would make. But yes, it's more wavy. It's more up, more down. Overall, Andrea, how would you describe the shape? Are there any striking features? Where's the low point? Where's the high point? That's bell-shaped. Interesting. Okay, very nice. Yes, okay. So it goes, I see what you mean, Christopher. So it scoops up at the beginning to Creator, and then it comes back down and with a scoop. I think that's what you mean by that. That's interesting. Yes, almost like the opposite of the previous one in terms of shape. If I go back, I think there we're an inversed arch. Here we're kind of going up and back down again overall. Yes, certainly on a small scale it's more wavy. So the shape, I've sketched my shape there. That's my idea. It doesn't, I mean, again, it's not I'm not saying that is the perfect green marker for this hymn. It really is, what I'm trying to get across is that it's a way of visualizing what you see. It drops lower. Yes, well, that is also true. It drops lower at the end there. So it's something like that. When I drew that earlier on, I thought it looked like Mount Everest. And in many respects, this is the Everest of the te lucis. What I'm trying to get across is it goes up and then it goes up again, but not quite as high, and then it comes back down. But there could be more detail. But that's the way to kind of spot what's going on there melodically. In each case, anyway, we're looking at them and we're stepping back, and then we're going further in. So different levels on which we can approach it. Started to do some circling. There's some fourths. So I can see there's a third at the beginning, procul re cedant. There's a third there. But I got more fourths, whereas the other one I had 1 fourth. Here I've got 3 fourths. That's my Here Comes the Bride. And something fresh. My eye spots that as I look through that. Any ideas, anyone? Perfect fifth. It is a perfect fifth. That's our first perfect fifth. We have an embarrassment of riches here, don't we, in terms of intervals. We've got seconds, moving by step. We've got thirds, procul re, there. I should have circled that really. That's a minor third. Looking, I can see a major third. I'll come back to that in a minute. I've got perfect fourths. I have got a perfect fifth. No sixths, no sevenths. But, you know, that is pretty taxing, if you like, on the brain cells. My fifths I like. I mean, again, it's very personal. It's a question of what you remember. But for me, a fifth is the beginning of Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, which isn't remotely doesn't sound remotely catchy at all, I guess. But I'm thinking of the piece that goes which it's a bit hard to sing an orchestral piece on the voice, but that initial interval, ta dum pum dum pum pum, that is my fifth. So ta da 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 is my fourth, whereas this is my fifth. Dum pum descending fifth in this case. Yes, would anybody like to tell me where the perfect third is? Let's. I mean, we seem to be getting quite technical tonight, which is fun. So I'm going to offer that as tonight's taxing question. Christopher, well done. Nepoluantur. There's one just before that, actually. Anybody? So Francesco is offering Strum or Trum, and that's at the beginning of the third line of music. Now, a G to an E, if one thinks about the piano keyboard, is 3 semitones. So that is our small third. It's not a major third. Is a third. Congratulations. Not a major third. Commiserations. So I don't know if anybody can offer. It's on that third line of music, just before Christopher's Nepal. Excellent. Raphael and Sarah. Quick succession. Sarah was stepping back to allow Raphael to give his answer, and then she offered it to us as well. So may and nay. Yes, it's of course the interval just before Christopher's example. So we have a descending major third, an ascending major third straight away. Anyway, to sum that up, we have there, if you like, the gamut of intervals. And so if I were approaching this in context, singing in context, maybe practicing or trying to help somebody else to learn it, I'll be mindful of the fact that this is challenging, relatively speaking. Simplified, it is pretty straightforward, but on the micro level, there's a lot more going on. And also, of course, we've got lots of melismata, the plural of melismata, melismas, I think is a little bit easier. So we've got more notes in this, more pitches also in this than in any of the other two. So again, we can theorize about the te lucis, but the reason I'm going into it is to try to give some tips for general purposes, coming across. But I mean, you can apply this to all sorts of situations. I think it's important perhaps to practice singing the different intervals, so singing Happy Birthday, singing Here Comes a Bride, singing Beethoven 3, singing the beginning of the Strauss, whatever melodies have those intervals, just so that your pitching is absolutely secure. Let me sing this one through. Te lucis ante terminum, rerum creator poscimus, ut pro tua clementia sis presulet custodia. It's mode 1, actually. That's another main difference. So just above the letter T, the big letter T at the beginning, you can see that is tells me there which mode I'm in, mode 1. That is what you could call the minor mode. So the way it concludes is with a kind of dolorous sound, da da dee da da, which is slightly different effect to the other two. So this is the hymn that we will be, I and Father Gabriel, God willing, will be singing tonight, and I'm hoping everybody will join us for that. There is a bit of time for some questions if anybody has them. I'll just mute the microphone for a couple of seconds. If you have any questions, I'll gladly answer them. So Sarah has a question, a basic question. I don't think anything's basic. It's possibly all relative. So what do the tiny dots, dot o notes, dot over the notes, dots over the notes? Oh, I think I know what you mean, Sarah. Are you talking about? Let's have a look. Well, could you just be a little bit more specific as to where you mean dots on the notes to the right? So are you thinking of something like in the first phrase there, Sarah, are you thinking about the dots next to num of terminum? Is that what you mean? Yes. Okay. Yes. It's a notational device to encourage you to wait a little bit longer on the note, so to hold it a little bit longer. I think it probably would be worth doing a class on notation at some point in general, but if it helps Sarah and anybody else, what one has to recall, I think I've already said about melodies being ingrained in the mind without having much theoretical knowledge. What one has to remember here is that the melodies were not passed down to us in the form that you are looking at right now. In actual fact, this notation is relatively modern, and it's obviously different from the notation that we might buy sheet music in nowadays, in the vast majority of cases. But this notation predates that really by one generation only, and therefore is by no means the notation of the original sources, or at least the sources that the first written sources, and basically the original source is human beings singing this, or if you like, breathed from Almighty God. So that dot is a suggestion of practice. So the people who invented this notation would have known that it was customary to sing a longer note at that point, and therefore they came up with a way to indicate it. So the dot is telling you to hold it a little bit longer. It has a slightly different meaning in modern notation. By modern notation, I mean completely up-to-date 5-line, 5-note stave notation, where it's a bit more specific. But for our purposes, it means to lengthen the note. And there are other ways of suggesting that too. You can see the amen at the bottom there, Sarah. The amen, the final two notes, have a dot each. So there we have amen. It's not anything precise. Some people would say it means to hold the note twice as long as the notes without the dots, but it's probably helpful just to think of it as slightly longer. Well, thank you very much for attending and for watching, and I hope that everyone of whatever prior standard has learnt something new. I will send the slides by email, and then you can refer to them. As I've said, at 9:30 tonight there will be a live celebration of Compline. God willing, if Father Gabriel is there, it will be with him. Otherwise you'll have to put up with me alone singing it. I'm very hopeful that you will be able to join in. Singing together is not possible. It's not so obvious when we're speaking, but there is in fact a delay which would preclude singing together. But hopefully, being on mute, even more so, you will be able to sing. If you have any comments on today's class or suggestions for future classes, then please email me at dirmusic@lms.org.uk, and you can keep up to date on all things Latin Mass by visiting the Latin Mass Society's website, lms.org.uk. Thank you very much.